All right, the last of the heroes we're going to look at specifically, at least by way of these video lectures, is the hero Jason. Jason and the Argonauts. And as we walk through this, basically this presentation will be basically a walkthrough of the high points of his adventures and such. And along the way, I want to make special touch points with kind of aspects of the hero's journey and that hero's cycle. Jason's story is one that adheres fairly closely in many regards to that hero story. And he's also a great example of how the Greeks by and large preferred to end their hero stories. Jason has one of the most pathetic ends of all the Greek heroes. And this is not to say that the Greeks did not have their happy endings. The hero Perseus is one of those heroes that kind of escapes the worst of that kind of stuff. But by and large, I like to end with Jason because in some ways we're kind of back to Daedalus and Icarus, the very first story we began with, and this idea that if you fly too high, that you are going to be brought too low, and the very act of being a hero is a kind of hubris that has to be countered by a catastrophe, and Jason is a great example of that. So we begin here. This is just a still from the famous early 1960s movie Jason and the Argonauts, which in its day was a huge leap in terms of special effects, although today it looks clunky and ridiculous. But here we have the skeleton army rising from the ground, one of the labors that Jason has to face before he claims the golden fleece. But we're getting ahead of the game here. All right, before we talk about Jason, we got to talk about the fleece. The fleece is the quintessential quest object for Jason, so just a little bit of background on kind of where it comes from and what's the story behind it. So the story goes is that there was a man named Athamas who was married to a woman Ino. But Athamas has an affair with Nephele. Nephele in ancient Greek just means cloud, and she is kind of a minor kind of nature goddess. And as a product of that affair, she becomes pregnant and gives birth to twins, Phrixus and Helle. Well, this makes Ino, of course, very angry, justifiably so. And so Nephele, fearing that Ino may be plotting against the children, so she kind of falls into that Hera role, and so she can't go after the goddess, so she goes after the children. And so Nephele, to save the children, she chooses a very odd way of saving them. She places them on the back of a kind of a magical, mystical golden ram, which can fly or skirt across the surface of the water, and sends them on the back of this heaven-sent ram, and to run away with the children before Ino can get her hands on them. And so they flee Greece, and they make their way up into this area here. So this is kind of where Europe meets Asia down here, where Europe kind of meets what we would call Turkey, and this choke point between the Aegean Sea and what the Greeks called the Euxine Sea, which means the calm sea, which we call the Black Sea today. This is the direction in which the ram is heading. And tragically, at this point, somewhere in this general area, Helle, one of the children here, falls off the ram, plunges to her death into the waters, and thereafter giving her name to the area. We still call this area the Hellespont today. Hellespont in Greek just means the sea of Helle, and marks the tragic spot of her death. Phrixus hangs onto the ram and keeps going, and we'll get to that in just a second. I found this just really kind of funny and wonderful and charming in its own way. I found this what was clearly an elementary school project of illustrating the story of Jason and the Argonauts. Lucy Merton, our third grader here, drawing the death of Helle, and I love the kind of the snap action photo aspect to it. Here she's falling, her denim skirt flying in the air, her ponytail pointed down. Phrixus hangs on as she plunges to her death in this happy little school of fish down below the waters. But I think the most fascinating part is that instead of a golden ram with a golden fleece here, we have an animal which is curiously looking like Clifford the Big Red Dog, which is another version of the story that I would love to hear. Anyways, Phrixus carries on. So here's the Hellespont, up through the choke point of the Bosporus, makes his way along the north coast of what we would call Turkey today, and finally arrives in the land of Colchis, which from the Greek point of view was kind of the edge of the world. This is almost like, in terms of kind of known areas, this is as far as you can go. And so Phrixus comes with a ram. They're welcomed by King Aeetes there, as honored guests, a good kind of act of xenia, of hosting friendship there. Phrixus sacrifices the poor ram. This poor ram that saved him and took this long journey is rewarded by being killed, but sacrifices the ram to Zeus, thanks to the god for protection. And Phrixus takes the golden fleece off the ram before sacrificing the animal and gives that to Aeetes as a gift. And Aeetes recognizes this divine, wondrous object, and he savors it and favors it and places it in a garden, and places a large serpent to guard it. And so there we have kind of the forbidden quest object deep in the secret garden, guarded by a monster. It's a classic setup for a hero quest motif down the line. All right, so the story of Jason. How did these stories intersect? Well, way back in Greece, in an area called Iolcus, in northern Greece, Jason is a hero of northern Greece. A man by the name of Cretheus is the king in this area, and his son Aeson, who is Jason's father, is the rightful heir. And so that would mean Aeson would become king, and then Jason would fall into line. He's part of a royal line, but we have this. Of course, this whole chain of succession interrupted, and this is again a classic aspect of a masculine hero's journey. The hero is in line for the throne. Something happens to jeopardize that, and a quest has to be undertaken to set it right. Jason's story falls directly into that almost cliched, well, it's cliched, nowadays, thousands of years later, into the storyline. What happens? Well, Peleus, he's our villain in this story, one of a number of villains in this story. He takes the throne by force, exiles Cretheus, imprisons Aeson, and claims power and shifts the dynasty to his own family. Now, Aeson, before he's captured, again, he fears for his son's life, what Peleus might do to the young boy Jason, so he sends off Jason deep into the woods to be raised secretly by the centaur Chiron. And this is your Luke going to Yoda, or Luke going to Obi-Wan moment. Chiron is the Yoda, the Obi-Wan, the Gandalf, plug in your mentor figure in Greek mythology. Achilles, there's traditions about Achilles is sent deep into the forest and to be raised and trained by Chiron, and Jason also falls into this role. And so Jason is sent off, Aeson is in prison, Cretheus is exiled, and then one day Peleus, he's our interloper here, here's our usurper, he receives a strange oracle and a prophecy. And if you remember, the rule of prophecies, the rule of oracles in these stories is they have to come true. No matter what you do to twist and turn, to get out of them, to get around them, to get past them, to escape their awfulness, you cannot. And so the oracle usually goes something along the lines of that one day a man will come to Iolcus wearing only one shoe, and that man, that symbol of the one-shoed man, will be worn by the man who will destroy you. So Peleus is now always looking over his shoulder. Where has anybody seen the one sandaled man? So Jason, he grows up trained by Chiron. He's ready to emerge, kind of to take on the steps towards his kind of restoring the family honor and throne. He starts to come home, but on his way there, he comes to a rain-flooded stream. And there he finds an old woman standing at the banks of the water, unable to cross. But it's more dire than that. The woman there is desperate to cross because she's being chased by these satyrs, these lusty woodland spirits who seek to attack her, capture her, and likely rape her, violate her. So Jason, being the good Boy Scout that he is, picks up the old woman and carries her across, and here's where he loses a sandal in the muck of the river bottom halfway across. And so they make it safely across, and Jason doesn't realize that this is no ordinary old woman. This is actually the goddess Hera in disguise. And Hera already hates Peleus. for neglecting her temples and neglecting her rights. And so here Hera plays. She more or less kind of disappears from the story, kind of oddly, but she plays at least briefly a rare role for her as a helper of heroes. Athena soon will take over this role, but Hera naturally has an affinity for Jason because what he did for her, but also because Peleus is a common enemy of them both. So Jason arrives in town, and in most versions of the story, he's naive. He doesn't really have a plan for what to do. And Peleus, of course, he has his spies, people looking out for the one-sandaled man, and then Jason arrives as the one-sandaled man, and Peleus starts to panic. And so Jason confronts Peleus, but of course Jason has no clout. He has no army. He has no means by which he can retake the throne. He's really at the mercy of Peleus, and Peleus is almost amused by this. And so he tells Jason, "Sure, I'll give you the throne back. I'll give it back to you and your family if you can go and bring me the golden fleece." And it represents a kind of, why would Peleus do this? Well, to get the golden fleece is to impose the impossible quest. Nobody can get the golden fleece. Anybody goes after it will never return. And so you might as well be Perseus going after the head of Medusa, who again against all odds gets the Gorgon's head. The golden fleece also shows up in other stories. Atreus's rivalry with Thyestes, which we didn't really talk about specifically in this class. Also, a kingship, a proper kingship, hinges around who can produce a golden fleece. And so it's an ultimate object of legitimacy and power and heroism. So Jason doesn't know what to do, and as he often does, he relies on the expertise of others to help him along the way. And so he realizes that he can't do this alone. And so Athena steps into her kind of a typical role as the hero helper, and between her and a shipbuilder named Argus, they build the fastest ship ever built, the Argo. The root of that word in Greek means like keen, swift, sharp. Swift as I have here, and it could hold up to 50 sailors. And so he's going to not only build the fastest ship ever made, which will help him accomplish this journey, but he will also have kind of the dream team to help him along the way. And so then he goes along recruiting. And there's a few versions of the story, and the list of who is an official Argonaut and who's not changes from place to place. But there's kind of a core that remains the same. And I don't have the time to go into all of them here. Heracles, as I mentioned in the last lecture, is famously becomes one of the Argonauts, although he abandons the mission about halfway through. Orpheus, the great singer, the man who can charm all beings, human or animal, or even in the plant world, with his music and his song. And kind of the idea is that each of these heroes that are one of the Argonauts has a particular talent. They're a good fighter, they're a trickster, they have magical abilities, they have geographical knowledge, and they can all kind of team together to get the job done. Jason is kind of he's kind of a cipher in a way. I find him in many ways kind of uninteresting. There's in the stories about him, there's not a lot that's kind of naturally heroic about him, but maybe kind of his talent is in kind of delegating and putting together a good team rather than kind of taking on the burden of heroism all himself. So here's a map that kind of shows probably the most famous version of Jason's story. There's an epic poem which you can still read. It survives. It's kind of a mini Odyssey type poem called the Argonautica, or the Voyage of the Argonauts. Apollonius Rhodius, who was an epic poet, left this behind, and it survives. And so the red dotted line shows the journey from Iolcus, again following kind of that path of Phrixus and the ram, going all the way to Colchis, going inland to where the secret garden is, getting the fleece. And the blue dotted line shows kind of the long detoured route home that they take, and this is an opportunity for Jason and the Argonauts to have all kinds of Odysseus-like adventures on the high seas and meet all kinds of interesting people and creatures before they finally make it back home to Iolcus. So there's certainly lots of overlap with Odysseus with Jason's story, and in fact they encounter in Apollonius's version many of the same adventures. Lots of adventures along the way. I'll tend to hear just the most famous of them. The Argonauts get lost, and they learn that blind King Phineus Remember, blind characters often have a kind of a second sight into things. They learn that he can help them on their way to Colchis. And Phineas says, "Yes, I'll help you, but you got to help me with my own problem." Phineas has been beleaguered by the harpies, kind of these vengeful, winged female kind of bird-like creatures that come in and steal his food. This one's making off with a loaf of bread, and this one's grabbing a pile of stuff. And here's blind Phineas with his hands up in the air, leave me alone. And so Phineas says, if you can get rid of the harpies, then I will help you on your way. So Jason and the Argonauts have to use their talents to defeat the harpies, and then Phineas reveals the secrets of how to proceed in their mission towards Colchis. Other things that they have to go through, this choke point called the Bosporus was often, there was also a tradition that this was the area of what the Greeks called the Symplegades, which in Greek just means the smashing together things, and this idea that the two cliffs on either side of this passage, if you sailed too slowly, they would crash together and smash you and flatten whatever was between the straits. And so the Argo it becomes the only or the first ship to be fast enough to slip between them before they can smash together and take out the ship. There's one story that this was the path by which the doves brought the ambrosia to the gods, and as a sacrifice, the last bird in that train would be sacrificed to the Symplegades. They would smash and crush the bird, and so the Argo waited until that last bird was crushed, the rocks smashed together, and as they were splitting apart, as they were kind of reloading, so to speak, the Argo sailed and rowed fast enough before the rocks could recover and destroy them. All right, so there's a lot of stuff that I'm cutting out here, but eventually the Argonauts make it all the way to Colchis. And here, Jason demands or requests the fleece, and King Aedes, of course, doesn't want to give up the fleece, and so he sets these labors to him, kind of these pre-labors. He says, "Okay, you have to prove yourself to get the fleece," and so he has to yoke a pair of fire-breathing bulls, plow a field with them, sow dragon's teeth in the furrows, and then of course, from the dragon's teeth grow the armed men, and he has to deal with this. Of course, Aedes seems to be hoping that Jason will of course, fail, and he will die in all of this. But if he can get past this, then he can prove his worthiness to enter the garden and get the fleece. Now, again, Jason can't do it alone, and secretly, along the way, Aedes' daughter, Medea, has been helping him, and this is a folkloric archetype that is often called the turncoat daughter. And there's lots of stories that are like this: is that the strange hero arrives on the shores, becomes a rival of the king of those shores, and behind the king's back, the king's daughter falls for the hero and helps the hero behind her father's back. And Medea is a classic example, although we'll quickly see that she becomes a force of nature of her own right in a way that the turncoat daughter in stories usually does not happen. So she's helped him along the way. She gave him an ointment that would protect him from the fire, from the breathing of the bulls. She gives him the trick to defeat the armed men that grow from the serpent's teeth. And she helps him again with the giant serpent that's guarding the fleece. So she offers her magic along the way. So Medea is not just the beautiful princess, but she is a powerful, dangerous sorceress in her own right. And so she gives Jason an ointment, a potion, and says that if you pour it into the serpent's eyes, the serpent will go to sleep, and you'll be free to grab the fleece. And so here we see in this this kind of Renaissance era woodcut portrait of a version of the story. Here's Jason sneaking up on a rock, and he pours the liquid from Medea's bottle into the eyes. Here the serpent is clearly kind of almost like a dragon in a fantasy medieval tale, and puts the dragon to sleep. And there you can see the fleece hanging on the tree in the background. The Latin at the top here, "Ie son sopet draconum custodum aure valeris," translates to, Jason puts the draconum, the dragon, the serpent, to sleep. The dragon who is the custodum, the guardian of the aureae valeris, the golden fleece. In your book, I don't know if you had a chance to notice this. This is really interesting. There's a cup painting which shows this version of the Jason story. What's really striking about this, there's no written version of this story that describes what seems to be happening here. But it's clearly the Jason story. You can see the fleece hanging in the tree in the background. Here's Athena standing by, playing her hero helper role. But here we see Jason being either swallowed by or being vomited up by the serpent. And like I said, there's no written version of this, but it suggests that the painting suggests that this was one version of the story that was out there at one point. And it very much reminds me, if you're familiar with the Old Testament, the Bible story, Jonah and the whale, where Jonah is swallowed by the great sea creature and then vomited up 3 days later. Maybe there was a similar kind of story where, Jason, remember the aspect of the hero story is that you face death in a very visceral kind of way. So was Jason swallowed by the serpent, destroyed? He dies, but then he's resurrected. He comes back again. It could not surprise me as a kind of spin on the masculine hero journey. Now, it's Jason's story is also a classic Greek one. Is that the moment that he claims the quest object is kind of the moment things start to go downhill for him, and it's largely his story becomes less his story and becomes the story of Medea. So Medea runs off with him, and so Jason has the fleece, but he also has the king's daughter, and Aedes sends his fleet against Jason to get his daughter back and maybe get the fleece back. But Medea's already thinking ahead. She's brought along her younger brother. In some versions, it's even her infant brother, and she kills her own brother, dismembers him, and throws the parts of her brother into the wake of the ship, knowing that the pursuing fleet, out of religious sacred duty, would gather up the pieces for proper burial and allow Medea then and Jason enough time to escape. It's brutal and it's awful, and this is just a kind of a taste of things to come. So they ultimately make their way back to Iolcus. And Jason presents the fleece to Peleus. He said, "Look, you asked me for the fleece. If I brought you the fleece, you'd let me have the throne." But Peleus, of course, never expected Jason to ever return, and Peleus stubbornly refuses, reneges on his promise. And again, Jason doesn't have. Again, he's really a cipher. He doesn't have a plan. He doesn't know what to do. But of course, Medea now is running the show, and she has a plan. And she uses her sorcery and her magic and her craftiness to get what she wants. And so what she does, it's dastardly. She goes to the daughters of Peleus, the usurper king, and she shows them a trick. She dismembers an old ram on its last legs and puts the pieces of the ram in a cauldron, witch style. Does her incantations, and out of the cauldron pops a new young ram. And the daughters of Peleus are amazed. That's incredible. And Medea says, "Yes, it is incredible. But tell you what, your father Peleus is getting old. Wouldn't you like that to be able to do that for him? I can use the same magic to make him a young man again." And Peleus' daughters, taken in, are naive, and they say yes. And Medea says, "Well, all you have to do then is kill your father, dismember him, bring me the pieces of your dad, and I will make him young again." And in their naivety and under the spell of Medea, they do just that. They kill their own father and dismember him and bring the bloodied pieces to Medea. But of course, Medea has gotten what she wanted. Peleus is dead, and she refuses to use her magic on Peleus. Well, once the Iolcans kind of hear about what has been happening and hear about who Medea is, they won't stand for it, and they run Jason and Medea out of town. So that oracle for Peleus came true. Jason, by bringing Medea along, was the vehicle of his own destruction, but Jason does not reclaim the throne. Because of what Medea does, they're exiled from Iolcus down the coast around the bend, and they find the only town that will take them in is the city of Corinth, where the mainland meets the Peloponnesus. And here the story gets worse. So Jason lives with Medea for a while. They have a couple of children together. But Jason decides that he's not getting anywhere living with this foreign woman, this non-Greek woman who everybody's terrified of. He's an outcast, he's a pariah, and he's never going to live the life of royalty that he deemed was his birthright. And so Jason, he's never married Medea. They've been just living together and they had children together. Jason goes behind Medea's back and he goes off to Corinth, and he makes a pitch to marry the king's daughter. and marry into the royal line and ultimately become king of Corinth. And the king agrees, and the king's daughter Glauce is betrothed to Jason. And so then Jason goes back to Medea and announces what's going to happen. And again, Jason proves himself to be very naive. Has he not seen who this woman is, what she can do, and how she might react to this news? But Jason announces, the most famous version of this is in Euripides' play Medea, where it's extremely cold. Jason basically comes in and says, I'm leaving you, and I'm marrying this other woman, and I need you to get out of town. And Medea immediately starts to plot, and she's horrified, she's angry, she's terrified, and she's absolutely livid. But she plays it cool, and she tells Jason, "Okay, I understand. Could you at least give me a day or two to arrange my affairs, and then you'll never see me again?" And Jason's, wow, I didn't know you take it so well, but yes, of course you may have a day or two. And then Medea puts her plot into motion. She even says to Jason, I even, just to show there's no hard feelings, I even have a gift for your new bride. And here is a beautiful new gown. And Jason says, again, wow, I didn't know you'd take this so well. So Jason goes to, brings the cloak to Glauce, and she puts it on. But like Heracles in his poison cloak, this cloak is designed to destroy and kill. So Glauce puts the cloak on, and immediately starts to kind of burn and melt to death, and she dies the slow, agonizing death. Her father, Creon, is horrified, reaches out to save his daughter, but once he touches the cloak, he too is engaged by the horrible magic, and he too is destroyed. So they're gone. Jason discovers this, too late, and then he rushes back home, only to find that Medea has left, but has murdered their 2 children. And in Euripides' version of the story, she appears in the sky in a snake-drawn chariot as this fury of vengeance, and she has destroyed Jason. She's left him alive, but bereft of everything: his fiancée, his father-in-law to be, his 2 children. He's left with absolutely nothing. So what happens to Jason? So like I said, Jason is famous for having what I would say is one of the most pathetic ends of all the Greek heroes. Left with nothing, he wanders down to the beach, and there sits kind of the hull of his old ship, the Argo, which has been parked, unsailed for years, rotting and falling apart. And he sits down and rests his head against the siding, and it's at that moment that the large prow above rots off, falls, hits him on the head, and kills him. And again, it's that dark irony that the Greeks loved, that kind of be careful what you wish for, you just might get it. And so, the thing that Jason is most famous for, the great emblem of his heroism, the great ship, is the thing that ultimately is the vehicle of his own death. So again, why did the Greeks tell stories like this? Like I say, the whole notion of the happy ending is really quite a modern one. And what's the point of having heroes come to such inglorious ends like this? Well, I think it boils down to that Daedalus and Icarus type of notion, that if you fly too high, you're going to be brought too low. And this idea that while we might celebrate the hero and the act of heroism, and in our day and age we tend to kind of think that will lead to a happily ever after in a Disney kind of way, for the Greeks, an act of heroism is impressive, is to be celebrated, is to be sung about, is to be admired, but it's also at root an act of hubris. It's an overstepping. And overstepping acts of hubris call for the balance of nemesis and bring ultimately the hero low. So on that happy note, I end our video lectures for this class. See you soon.